Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau. And if you guys have been around me for any amount of time, you'll know that I love books and I love talking to authors. And a lot of the books that I even read are based on our previous guest recommendations. So thank you to everybody who has ever recommended a book that has been important to them. And I try to read as many of them as I can. And one of the books that I read not too long ago was this book. So any of you guys watching on YouTube, if you can see, I think my light's having a little glare. It's called Chasing the Bright Side by Jess Ekstrom. And it's she's a New York Times bestseller. Many of you might know Jess. She's been on like every major news outlet, including the Today Show, Good Morning America, The View, Vanity Fair. She's been featured in People Magazine, Business Insider, Huffington Post, Forbes, like you name it. It just, her like resume goes on and on. But what I love about Jess, and I loved about the book, and I love about her story, is she's a woman entrepreneur. She is going to come and talk about her journey, how she started a multi-million-dollar company in her dorm room. And not just any company, but a company that advocates for kids with cancer, which again, if anybody's been around me for a hot second knows that that is an area that is very near and dear to my heart. And so the fact that she built her platform and was able to use all of her gifts and talents for this amazing cause is incredible. But since then, she's transformed and elevated her mission and messaging to help other women and entrepreneurs identify kind of their own passions. And I love that. So she's got workshops and she's got a new book coming out that's geared towards kids entrepreneurs. And so I reached out to Jess actually on Instagram to just say, hey, I'm a huge fan of your book. I really love what you do. And would you want to come on my show and just share your story? And so graciously, she said, absolutely. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my new friend, Jess Ekstrom, to the show. Welcome, Jess.
Yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, quite the intro. I was just mesmerized and forgot that I was actually going to have to talk.
Well, I always like to kind of give a little bit of context about not just who our guests are, but kind of why I feel like they're a good fit for our show and why I think they're going to bring value to our listeners. And so hopefully I, again, on a very 10,000 foot overview, just, captured a few of the nuggets of what you do. But,
I needed a confidence boost and you definitely gave me that.
Please. All right, Jess. So obviously we know you're an author. We know you've got all these different things, but just walk us back, give us your story. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Oh my gosh. So I think, as a kid, I was always trying to just figure out ways to make things better. And not going to lie, I also was always trying to figure out ways to make money. I mean, I think my first business was selling my toys on eBay. And I would take my mom's a sheet from the linen closet and put it up, in my room and have her digital camera. And I would pose my American Girl dolls as a product photo and put them on eBay. And so I just was always trying to figure out what do people want, what makes people tick. And it wasn't until, we had this camping trip, we always go on as a family. And I remembered getting super frustrated with these headphones that I was trying to put on because I was a teenager and, not wanting to be in the wild. I wanted to listen to the Backstreet Boys or whatever I was going to listen to. And I remember getting so frustrated that these headphone cords kept getting tangled in a knot. And I said to my dad, who's also an entrepreneur, I wish that headphone cords could just roll up like a slinky, so that they don't ever have to get tangled again. And I just, very confidently was like, I'm just going to invent that. And I remember him like sitting me down and telling me that was something that had already been invented, already on the market. But he really encouraged me. He was like, keep thinking that way, keep looking for like moments of frustration and where can you find inspiration in them. So I wasn't always the smartest kid. I wasn't a good test taker, but I would say that's the approach that I started to take, which eventually led me to start Headbands of Hope. And that's what, I'm also passionate about today, is helping kids and women like look at the world through the lens that they can fix it.
Yeah. And I don't want to give too much away, because obviously you tell the story beautifully in the book. So we don't want to spoiler alert for people, because I want everyone to go out and read the book. But just for people that are listening out there, just give an overview of what Headbands for Hope is, how, and again, we'll link up to everything. So if people want to get involved and learn more, purchase, whatever, they'll be able to follow. But just give, an overview of that whole venture, if you will.
Yeah. Well, it started when I was in college. I was interning for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which was truly incredible. And I would see a lot of kids that would lose their hair to chemotherapy, and they'd be offered a wig or they'd be given a hat. And, a lot of them weren't really concerned with covering up their heads. They just wanted something to feel good about themselves after hair loss. And so I would see a lot of them opting to like buy their own or wear their own headbands. And I just remember thinking it was such a cool gesture of confidence for these kids to be like, you know what, I want to wear a headband. I don't care that my head is bald. Like, I just want to accessorize. And I remembered like Googling headbands for kids with cancer or something along those lines, and nothing came up. And I think that that's really like a crossroads for anyone, is like when you're looking for something that you want or need, but you can't find, or you can't find it the way that you want it. There's probably other people that are looking for that same thing, that, that need isn't being met. And so I think it was an advantage at the time, being like, 17, 18 years old. And I call it, the dumbest, smartest moment of my life, where I was like, oh, if this doesn't exist yet, I'll just create it, having no idea what I was in for, knew nothing about entrepreneurship, messed up a lot, which I'm happy to get into. But I had this itch and decided to create, a scratch. And so I started Headbands of Hope. For every headband sold, we donate one to a child with an illness.
I love it. I love it. And just, I don't know, I may have mentioned this in my DM, but either way, I do a lot of work with the St. Baldrick's Foundation, which raises money for pediatric cancer research.
Oh, I love St. Baldrick's. They're great.
So our community's been impacted quite a bit in our personal lives with pediatric cancer. So it's a foundation that's very near and dear to our hearts. And so we do a lot of work, and our community does a lot of work. And so anybody that is advocating for kids and families and trying to be a solution provider is like golden in my book. So obviously I have a personal affinity for what you do and love it. And so I think it's great. But from there, I think, again, it just goes to show, and it's so much for anybody that's listening out there that is either an entrepreneur or maybe even thought like, I have this idea, but it's dumb. Because a lot of times we have that inner critic voice that's like, nah, that's too hard, or nah, you shouldn't do that, or nobody would buy that, or that's stupid, or whatever the negative talk that we tell ourselves. Go for it. Like, just try. Like, if you feel like there's some value and merit to what you're doing. And I love that that's kind of what your messaging is overall.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's like our inner dialogue can be our biggest cheerleader or our biggest critic. And I think so much, I've done a lot of like research on inner dialogue, and because I recognize like there are points where I am my biggest critic, or sometimes I am my biggest cheerleader. I'm like, when does that happen? And what triggers that? And, I learned that that so 80% of our thoughts today are thoughts that are recycled from yesterday. And so a lot of times we believe anything that passes through our head to be true or a thought that's formed on a fact. But most of our thoughts aren't born out of truth. They're born out of repetition. So if we can go back, like whatever thought that isn't serving you, you know, you can almost think about where was the origin. Like I remember, a thought that wasn't serving me that I realized is like this idea that I'm not good with numbers. You know, I'm not good at math. I'm not a numbers person. And anytime I would have a meeting with like our CFO or financial advisors or, you know, something that had to do with like forecasting budgets, and I would just announce to the room, like, this isn't my, you know, areas of expertise. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was really just, you know, not setting myself up for success. And I started to think like, well, where did this thought derive from? And I literally went back to fourth grade. There was a day that we learned fractions, and that was the day that I was sick and I wasn't there. And apparently there was just like one day in fourth grade where we all learned fractions.
That's it.
And
It's one day.
that's
You're
it.
either there and
You're there or
you
you're
miss the boat.
not. And like, good luck with the rest of your life, because, you know, the fraction ship has sailed. And I remember getting to school the next day and the teacher like called me up to the board and was like, you know, what's 1/4 of whatever? And I froze, and it was so embarrassing. And I remember just being like, I never want to do math, you know, again. And then, you know, I bring that back to today and I'm like, you know, that thought has been just born out of repetition, not truth.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm running, you know, a couple multi-million-dollar businesses, which means I have to be good at numbers a little bit. So maybe that's just a thought that isn't serving me anymore that I can choose to leave behind. So with your inner dialogue is really interesting if you challenge it, like, and not mistake anything that comes through your head with being true.
Right. And I agree. And thank you, Mrs. Jackson in first grade, for telling me that I wasn't good at math. Just saying, just not bitter at all.
Look at me now.
But, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think, you know, I'm a big like facts are your friends.
Yeah.
And our feelings are our feelings, but our feelings can lie to us, and we might feel that. And I get this a lot, kind of threading the needle. We could thread it with multiple areas of our lives, but I get a lot with when it comes to organizing, where I've always been messy, or I've always been disorganized, or I've never been able to do it. And whether it's something that is true or whatever, you grew up in a house where there was disorganization, or you never learned the skills to do it, you know, doesn't mean that that's kind of like your destiny. And maybe you were good at fractions, but that doesn't mean that you should like, okay, period, full stop, I should never do anything that's going to involve math, because like, that's just, you're limiting yourself. So I think, again, that inner critic can tell us these stories and really be a roadblock in all areas of our lives. And I see it a lot in the work that we do.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like, when you think about where you want to be or what you want to do, like, what are the thoughts that tell you otherwise? And when you can pinpoint what those are, you can look for evidence as to why they're not true. And you can also create your own evidence. And I love that when dealing with inner dialogue, that's like a tactic that I teach in Mic Drop Workshop, which is my course for women speakers. And a lot of times they're like, well, imposter syndrome is so real, especially when it comes with speaking or anytime that you're really putting yourself out there. And sometimes they come to me because they want to understand, like, well, how do I be a keynote speaker? Or what do I charge? Or how do I build my talk? But what they're really looking for is evidence that they can call themselves a speaker. You know, they're hesitant to put the word speaker on their LinkedIn bio if they haven't been paid yet, or they're hesitant to apply for that, you know, local TEDx talk if they don't feel like they're ready. And so sometimes when we think about who we want to be or what we want to do or how we want to self-identify, like, create your own evidence as to why that's true. So if you want to be a speaker, well, what would a speaker do today? Or if you want to be an entrepreneur, what would an entrepreneur do today? And just start creating your own evidence, because that's really what our mind loves, is to be able to pair thought with action. Like, I thought something about myself and I actually have action to prove that I did it. And it doesn't even matter how big or small that action is.
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to say, is it doesn't have to be big and epic. It could be one small step. And again, we talk about this, threading it back, you know, in our world, where you don't have to be the most organized person, but open your mail, put your keys back, put the dishes in the dishwasher, make your bed. All of these, again, go, what is it? I want to be an organized person. What would an organized person do? How would they start their day? What is one thing or something that I could do to help myself be more organized or less, or even less stressed, if the way, think about it that way, what's one thing I could do to take off my plate or to delegate or whatnot? These are the things, but sometimes we get caught up in the end, like what the result is, that it just seems like, oh my gosh, that mountain is so big to climb, but like, you really just have to take one step.
Totally. I mean, it's so in line with something that I tell people. I'm like, don't worry about winning the Super Bowl. Just get the first down. Like, that is all you need. And when when we're so focused on winning the Super Bowl or winning the game, then we don't like do those 1 yard gains. And the 1 yard gains are the only things that matter, at the end of the day, and they add up big.
Yeah. And it's so much. And I think, again, regardless of where you are, it's like, you just got to show up every day. You got to show up, right? Making your football analogy, you got to show up to practice, right? Like, you got to show up, you got to practice, you got to put in the work. And, someone said to me recently something like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you have over 300 episodes of your podcast. And they're like, how do you do it? I was like, I don't know. I get up every day and just like, it's boring.
Just keep showing up.
Like, it's boring. I wish I had some grand thing. It's like, no, I just keep my head down and I keep going because it's something that I love and I believe in and I want to use this. So if there are things that are important to you, you got to keep plowing ahead. And I love that you said with Headbands for Hope that you made a lot of mistakes along the way, but you just kept going. And some of it was probably like, when you're young, you just do things and you don't really think about the long-term, like, oh my gosh. But, don't let the mistakes stand in your way, I think, is a big thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you said something really important. It's like, well, when you're young, you're not really thinking about like long-term repercussions or even long-term progress. You're just like living in the moment, which I think can actually be a really great strategy for entrepreneurs, which is why I wrote Create Your Bright Ideas, is because I think that the mindset that kids and teens have can make the best entrepreneurs. Because as we get older, and this is something that I always have to challenge myself with, and I'm sure you do too, is like, sometimes more information and more knowledge and more data about the world, like puts us in an analysis paralysis.
Totally.
But when we're kids, it's like, for me, I still, at 17, whenever I started Headbands of Hope, I consider myself a kid. I'm like, I didn't have any knowledge or data around how many businesses fail or how many women, don't ever reach the $1 million mark or how hard I didn't have any of that. I was like, I see a need and I'm going to try to fix it. And I think we should be like that more.
Yeah, it was a little bit like ignorance is bliss. You know what I mean? Like, you were just like, I'm going to do it. I remember when I started my business, like in 2009, and that wasn't like a mainstream organizing business. And I was just like, I don't know, organizing comes easy to me. And I see a lot of my peers being like stressed out about stuff. Like, okay. And I wasn't concerned about followers or this or that, or like, I was just like, okay, here's a problem. Let me go solve it. And again, I'm not trying to oversimplify things for people, but I think sometimes it's just taking that leap of faith is so important.
Well, and I think that the like the mistakes that you'll make by being impulsive are vastly like less than the positive outcomes that can come from it. And that's something that I've like had to learn along the way and that's just been my experience. It's like, if I am feeling inspired about something and I just don't even put a ton of thought into it, like this Create Your Bright Ideas book was like shotgun. I'm like, yeah, this would be great to have a entrepreneurship book for kids. And of course, sometimes you're going to mess up when things aren't totally thought through, but you're also going to mess up when things are thought through. So you might as well just go when the inspiration hits, because the longer like that window is without action, like the more that inspiration will fade.
Yeah, totally. And I know we've touched on it. So first of all, show a picture, because I don't have a copy for anybody watching on YouTube. Create Your Bright Ideas. Talk a little bit about kind of what the catalyst was for you to say, I want to write this. Who, like, what's the age range for what it's for? Kind of just walk us through like the mission and goals for that book.
Yeah. So Create Your Bright Ideas is my book that comes out with HarperCollins, and it's for teens and tweens. Like, they market it for 8 to 12-year-olds, but I think it could really be older or even a little bit younger than that. And it's over 200 pages of, like, you read the story of how I started Headbands of Hope, but then there's lessons along the way. And for anyone watching on YouTube, I'll show you a little bit about what the inside looks like. After each chapter, there's like a tear out coloring page, there's journaling, there's challenges. But my favorite part is at the end of the book, you actually get a tear out business plan. So
I saw that. I was like, holy moly. I feel like there's a lot of people that could use that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, at the end of it, you get a tear out business plan. And so it's like, because I think that we don't give kids enough credit. Like, I've spoken at a ton of like Girls on the Run chapters or middle schools.
I just sit on the board of Girls on the Run.
Oh, really?
Yes.
We're doing a lot with them with the book. So
that's awesome.
I was in the first ever Girls on the Run group in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. When I was like a wee little one. I'll email you pictures of my first Girls on the Run race.
Oh my gosh. I've run many Girls on the Run 5Ks.
That is so funny. So chapter 4 of this book is about my Girls on the Run story.
I love it.
Yeah.
So
but
funny.
I mean, they have the best business ideas because they're not thinking in terms of limits. And so I think there's a lot of books out there that are like, you can do it, and some great motivation, but I'm like, let's put the pen to paper, create your business plan, like go for it. And so that's what I wanted this book to be, is not just the like courage, motivation, inspiration, which is there, but also like, this is how you do it. And I hope that at the end of it, after they read Create Your Bright Ideas, like, it's not just a motivation they feel, it's like a how to.
And that's such a great point, because we talk a lot about that here, is you need the both and, right? I think a lot of times in life, there's lots of people that are jumping to tell you how you should do something. But again, there's not a one size fits all for anything, whether it's organizing, whether it's entrepreneurship. Like, there's a million ways to skin a cat, right? So there's not just, this is the best way. But then there's also, on the flip side, a lot of motivational, inspirational things, but it doesn't leave people with the strategy and the plan of action of, okay, so now I'm hyped up, I'm motivated, I want to do this. But now what's the next step? Like, what is the actual tactical next step that I need to take? And so it's so great that you're blending the two. And that's like kind of what the work that we do here is, try to find out like what's firing you up, what's motivating you, and what are the actual steps to get there? Because I think so many times you're either in camp A or camp B, as opposed to doing A and B together.
Well, I can't remember who said this. I can't take the credit, but it was like, there's people who are too focused on like the head that they miss the heart. And then there's people that are too focused on the heart and they miss the head. And I think that is like, sums it up to a T with business. It's like, you have to have the blend of head and heart. Like, you can't just have heart, and you also can't just have head.
Okay. So do you know anything about the Enneagram?
Oh yeah, I'm a 3. You probably could have guessed that.
Of course you are.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably could have guessed that.
So
what are you? Wait, what are you?
I'm an 8.
Oh, I love that. My COO is an 8, and she puts me in line. And I love people who are direct, and so I get along really well with 8s.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm married to a 3. So I get along really well with 3s, and a lot of my clients are 3s. I do very well with them because I get your very big picture people, and I've done a lot of work on the
yeah. I'm like, don't bother me with the details.
No,
like,
exactly. But so I started, you want to talk about just, seeing a need, and like you said, with Googling the Headbands for Hope and not finding anything. So I started studying the Enneagram 5 years ago. I was introduced to it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love it because it's so much about motivation and the why, and all the work that I've been putting in the past 10 years with what I do in the book that I wrote. all has to do with the why of clutter. So I started Googling Enneagram and clutter, like where's the link, Enneagram and clutter, and there was nothing there. There was no research, there was no data, there was no books, there was no resources. And I started going to some of the leaders, like Suzanne Stabile that wrote The Road Back to You, like Ian Morgan Cron. Like I went to all these people saying, can you provide me like some direction? And there was nothing. I was like, okay, well then I got to create it. So that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years is, and I'm in the process of writing a book, but is linking the Enneagram and clutter tendencies, because the Enneagram looks at the three centers, the head center, the heart center, and the gut. So how we can use all of those. And specifically for me, it's how do you use each one of those areas when navigating your relationship with organization and clutter, because so many people are so stuck, for example, like in that head center where they like are over rationalizing, or that heart center where they're so emotionally attached that they're not taking action. It's like really the work that I do is trying to figure out how can you balance it. And the same goes true for entrepreneurship, where again, how can you use all three, that head, heart, and action? So you're speaking my language.
Oh my gosh. No, you're speaking my language. I cannot wait to see like what you find in this. And also remind me, there's someone that you have to connect with or have on the show. She's an Enneagram expert. Her name is Ashton Whitmoyer Ober.
She's been on my show.
Has she really?
Yes.
No way. So she's in Mic Drop Workshop, my speaking course. Yeah. And she is absolutely amazing. And I've read her Enneagram Made Simple. And so I was like, you two need to meet. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. I appreciate
world.
The connection. Yes. She has actually been on my show. I've done a couple of different Enneagram and clutter series, and she was on the first one. So,
oh my gosh, so funny. I'll have to reach out to her after this, but it really is like, and I think one of the things that I find so comforting about the Enneagram, because I'll admit I am not like if you could be any pizza, what would you be? Like, I'm not like a quiz person. And in fact, I was resistant to it because I'm like, I'm not going to answer a series of questions and then I'm going to tell, me who I am. But I found it so refreshing that it's like when you can realize where you lean or what your natural defaults and disposition is, then it gives you control to like lean into your strengths and have awareness of like what you want to change. For me, being an Enneagram 3, I'm obviously very achievement driven, and which can be great. And I credit that to a lot of the things that I've been able to build, but it's also the source of my anxiety. It's the source of like what keeps me up at night. Like, is it the biggest deal if this book comes out as a number 1, or is it a big deal that a bunch of kids read Create Your Bright Ideas and start their own businesses? And so I have to like check myself sometimes. And I feel like knowing where I am on the Enneagram, that I am the achiever, helps me do that.
Right. And that your worth, for people that aren't familiar with the Enneagram, like threes have to be mindful of not being identified that their worth is tied to their work, and I see this with my husband, who's a 3 and very, he's very achievement driven, and, that's a big deal. Like how he comes across. And again, like, I'm just like, I don't really care.
Yeah. Well, my husband's a 7. And so he is like, I don't forget what that's called. Is it like the enthusiast?
7s are the enthusiasts, but 3, 7s, and 8s were all in that aggressive stance, meaning that we use our feeling center the least. So we are either fluctuate between, we either fluctuate between doing and thinking. So
interesting. Okay. That's fascinating. But I call him my chief fun officer, because he is just like, let's just have a good time. Like, and we have such an opposite approach when it comes to work. And he actually, works with me on my business for the past couple of years. And like, at first I thought it was going to be a train wreck, and I'm like, it couldn't be better, because I actually enjoy myself now when he's around.
Well, and didn't I read something about you guys like living in an Airstream or something? Can we,
yes.
Can we just talk about that? Because I feel like, again, that's worth mentioning.
Small detail. Yeah.
Small detail.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like it was almost a rite of passage. Like, first, my parents 10 years ago sold their company and they got an RV and they decided to travel around the country. That was, and they're still doing it. Like they still haven't stopped like 10 years later,
Oh my
which is
God, that is so
insane to
cute.
me.
I just think like that's amazing that they like each other that much, that they want that much
I know. They
togetherness
got
time.
volunteer park ranger jobs. So they go around from different parks and yeah,
Stop.
they're adorable. So I would visit them. I was like, this is a really cool life, to go on the road. And so this was around in like 2019 when Chasing the Bright Side was going to come out. And so I said to Jake, my husband, I was like, what if we did like a book tour and an Airstream for a couple months, went around the country, and promoted this book. And so what started as like a 6-month book tour turned into 3 years because then the pandemic hit and we were just having such a great time. We were like, okay, we could go sit inside, or we could stay in our Airstream and just stay in national parks and go still, do things. And so 3 years we were in the Airstream.
Wow.
And yeah, it was amazing, but there was definitely obviously some, hiccups or speed bumps, as you might say, along the way, but it was a really great experience. But
And
now
you
we're
have
back
like
in North Carolina.
and you
Yeah.
have a 70-pound fur baby. So it was you guys and a big dog.
And a big dog. Yeah. Yeah. And a big dog.
And your
But yeah, it
dog's
was
name is
fun.
Ollie, right?
Yes.
I used to have a dog named Ollie. He passed away, but I was like,
Oh,
oh, I
I'm
have an Ollie. I
sorry.
saw that. That's okay. But I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I love Ollies.
I
So,
know. He's the best. Yeah.
but now you're back in North Carolina.
Now we're back in North Carolina. Yep. So
Okay.
we got back late last year.
So
Yeah.
let me ask you a question from an organization standpoint. So you traveled around for 3 years, you
Yeah.
didn't get out. Obviously, you can't have all of your physical possessions with you.
Yeah.
How is that? Now, I know I'm going to stereotype here. Okay. So tell me if I'm
Please.
wrong.
Yeah.
Every three I've ever met has almost like a visceral allergic reaction to clutter. So they don't like it. I think it has to do with that kind of image perception. Like I don't like physical clutter
Yeah.
around. Doesn't always make you organize. It just means that you don't like clutter. Like my
Mm.
husband will be quick to put something away, but not always necessarily being mindful of putting it away strategically, just putting it away because he doesn't want to see it. So
Spot on.
is that spot on? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's very common for threes.
Yeah. But what I will
Yeah.
say is when it comes to organization, living in the Airstream completely changed my relationship to things and
Ooh.
items. Because you have like one cabinet for all your plates, cups, Tupperware, whatever. And so you really have to choose, like, what do I actually need? And, at first when you're parting ways with things, like we put some stuff in storage, but we didn't put a ton of things in storage.
I was gonna ask if you put stuff in storage or you just
We did have a storage unit for like, our mattress, things that were like bigger items, but we did get like rid of a lot of things before we left on our trip. And you realize it's like, well, I have like 7 pairs of black leggings. Like, I don't want to part ways with them, but you do. And you realize you just need one. And you're like, I haven't thought about the other 6. Or, you think that you need like 12 different drinking cups and you really only need 3. Like there wasn't one time on the trip that I was like, dang, I wish I had that other cup. And so from being in the Airstream to moving into the house, I actually had a lot of anxiety around like, I don't want to have to fill spaces, and so we have a small house, like it's a 1930s, like historic home, but I've been very, very, very adamant about like, just because there's space there doesn't mean that we need to fill it with something. Because I really like having low possessions.
I love it. And I say that to people all the time because especially when people are used to, and we live in an area right now, like geographically, and I don't see a ton of clients anymore. But when I was seeing clients a lot of the people here have the luxury of space. They're not apartment dwellers. It's not urban living. And so there's a lot of space to fill. And I try to tell people to create, just like we want to create margin with our time, we want to try to create margin with our stuff. And just because you have doesn't mean just because you have this closet or this cabinet or whatever, you have to fill it to its max capacity. And I think there's this mindset that people have that they just feel like if I have an empty space, I need to fill it. If I have a blank wall, I need to put something on it. And a good friend of mine's an interior designer, and she was like, there's, and I didn't go to design school or anything, but she was like, there's something to be said for the white space. And that's what I try to tell people, is creating that white space in your home. And, when you're forced to, it's in some ways, like, if my husband grew up in an apartment, he grew up in Manhattan. And so there was no basement, there was no guest room, there was no like every space had to be accounted for. Like with your Airstream, you had to make some hard and fast decisions. Not that that was easy, but you knew, like, here's my space, that's all I can fill. But now you have a choice, now that you're back in a brick and mortar, to say, do I want to fill this? Am I bringing this in with intention, or am I just bringing it in to fill space?
Totally. And I think that that's like, the choice is harder, obviously, than the default. Like when you only have, however many small square feet, we were in a 25-foot Airstream, then it's really wasn't that hard, because you really didn't have a choice. But now that it's like, okay, there's this closet, or there's this like floor to ceiling, like organizer, I don't want to, I think that, you know what I'm saying, but it really did change my relationship to things and organization, and for the better. Like, I love being a minimalist.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like as I get older, and I mean, I have 2 grown-ish kids, but I tell people all the time, like, when they were younger and there was just stuff, like we had stuff. And as that stuff diminished, and now, like, I don't really need a lot. Like like, I just don't. And I'm somebody who doesn't like decision fatigue. Like, I don't like too many options. That stresses me out. Like, and as an 8, I feel like I'm always making decisions. I'm always the one that's in the role, and I don't mind it, but I'm like, if I don't have to make a decision, if it's like, oh, here's what you're wearing, or here's what you're eating, like, perfect. I don't need 20,000 options. That just adds chaos to my world.
I know. I always thought it was so stupid, like growing up with, like watching, Steve Jobs wear the same black turtleneck, or like Mark Zuckerberg wear the hoodie. And then I'm like, dang, now I get it. If I could just have one option each day, I would. I'm not going to do it, but like, I understand.
Totally. I totally get it. I get it. So, if you've obviously dropped lots of like words of wisdom and nuggets throughout our conversation, but like, as we kind of tie it and start to weave it to the end, what is and talk a little bit about Mic Drop real quick. So, because again, we want to kind of gear people, not just to the book, but talk about Mic Drop. I know we've referenced it, what it is, who it's for, how people can get involved in that. So go there.
Mic Drop Workshop started from this frustration of being the token woman on stages. Like, I started doing a lot of speaking after Headbands of Hope. Honestly, speaking was the way that I got Headbands of Hope started, with having a $0 marketing dollar budget. It was like, let me just go and speak at schools and see if I can spread the word. And then that turned into like, I didn't know that speaking paid money. And now here we are. And there would be so many scenarios where I'd get invited to speak, and it was like, man, like me. And sometimes event planners would even say, I would ask them like, oh, what was it about me or my message that you brought me to this conference? And they would say, well, we needed a woman, and we just haven't booked a woman speaker. I was like, did I just transport to the 1950s? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's like crazy town.
It's crazy. I mean, and now there's even like pledges. There's one called the Gender Avenger, where events can pledge that they're going to have like a 50%, gender like lineup, because that's how bad it still is. Like, only 30% of like paid speakers are women. And that number's actually gone down. And so I started Mic Drop Workshop just as a way. I was like, how can I just teach women like where to find events, how to build your talk, what to charge? Because there's not, a lot of paid transparency. I was charging like $5,000 to $8,000 a gig, and realized that the male speakers were charging like $30,000 to $50,000 of the same events. And I was ranking higher in the audience satisfaction. And I thank my lucky stars for the event planner that called me to tell me that one day. It was like, you need to charge more. So Mic Drop Workshop is an online course and community for women to become paid keynote speakers. So you can go to micdropworkshop.com, and we have a ton of free resources and free trainings just to get started.
I love it. I love it. And for anybody that's out there that's listening, that maybe even isn't an entrepreneur, maybe they're just listening at
Yeah.
home and they're just like going through, because we're always going through transitions in our lives. What are just some parting words of wisdom, advice? Again, you're just so motivational in your approach to everything. You know, drop some nuggets of wisdom before we kind of wrap things up.
Oh, okay, I'll give you something that I think has been helpful for me. Um, a little test that we can all do while we're listening.
Love it.
And I talk about this in Chasing the Bright Side, and it's like one of the main things that people come to me about that helped them. And it's a way that we can kind of gut check ourselves on our purpose. And so if you can think about the thing that you're chasing right now, whether it's like your business, whether it's something in your work or in your life, like the thing that you've been really gunning for recently, let's say you got it, you got that thing, but no one knew it was you. You had to remove your name from any accolade or any kind of recognition. Would you still do it? And I think that sometimes that's a really great way.
So good, Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something I have to check myself with a lot. It's like, yeah, if no one knew that Create Your Bright Ideas was written by me, I'd still do it because I think it's going to be a book that's going to help a lot of kids start their own business. But then there's like these, I don't know, like a 30 under 30 or whatever, when I was under 30, now I'm not, but I would chase. And it's like, I don't really care if it was just for how it looked and not how it felt. So I think it's a good way to kind of check yourself and just realign.
That's a great question specifically for our Enneagram threes.
Yes.
That's definitely, but I love it. And I think, again, that's so much about what we do in our lives, even the mundane, right? The stuff that's boring and unappreciative, like the day-to-day laundry, cleaning, preparing meals, driving your kids around, all of these things. Like, we're not always getting, especially for the people that aren't in an entrepreneurial, where they're not as a keynote speaker at an event, where they're not running a business that's helping kids with cancer. Like, not everybody's doing things that on the surface seem like epic life changers, but they are in your family, in your life, in your neighborhood, in your community. And I think we kind of oftentimes start to say, well, what am I bringing to the table? I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, but you're showing up every day.
Yeah, you're showing up. Consistency is like so underrated. I feel like I agree. It's one of the best things we can do.
I love it. I love it. So again, tell our listeners again, where can they find you, learn more, connect up with you?
If you're interested in getting Create Your Bright Ideas, you can go to createyourbrightideas.com and order it today. If you're interested in learning how to start your speaking career, you can go to micdropworkshop.com. And then I also have a hype text that I send out every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern. It's just like a couple words of encouragement for your week. And so you can text me the word hype to 704-228-9495, and you'll get that every Monday.
And I just wrote that code down. So we'll also have it in the show notes. So don't panic if you're like driving in the car or walking the dog right now and you're like, hey, what is that?
Don't try to do this in the car.
Yes. We have it. We got your back. Don't worry about it. All right, Jess, we're going to take our quick break and then wrap things up with our hot mess minute wrap up questions. So sit tight. All right. So as I said at the top of the episode before I brought you on, I love getting inspiration from our guests. And selfishly, I started a couple of years ago asking all of our guests a book that they've read that's been inspirational, transformative in their lives, personally, professionally, whatever. And it's how I came across your book. Someone referred me to you, and like, here we are. So I'm going to now pass the torch over to you and say, is there a book that you can name that's been some really impactful in your world?
Oh, so many to count, but one that really sticks out to me is actually a book that was written by a friend, Antonio Neves, and it's called Stop Living on Autopilot.
Ooh,
and
I like that.
The gut punches he has in this book, like, that purpose test that I just gave you is like something I like to do, but he has so many self-reflections. Like, for example, if you took the past 30 days of how you performed at your business or at your job, like, would your company still hire you? And there's just so many like really great gut checks for you and solutions. So I loved Stop Living on Autopilot.
Oh, see, and now there you go. Now I'm going to go buy it. I'm going to go buy it and read it. Thank you. Thank you. And then our last two questions we ask every guest in every 300 episode plus that we've had is, in this particular season of your life, where do you feel the most organized and where do you feel like a little bit of a hot mess?
In this particular season of my life, I think by the time this episode comes out, I will probably have told people, but I haven't told people right now. I am pregnant. And
you heard it here first, people.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm pregnant. Thank you. So I'm pregnant with, my first baby. She's due in February, a little girl.
Oh, yay. We love girls. I have two girls.
I know. I'm like, she's going to have so many headbands, but
so many headbands.
But so I think I almost am like feeling hyper organized in my work because I feel like I have to get everything done, which I know is kind of also a narrative. I'm just telling myself like my world isn't going to stop the moment I have a baby. And then I feel like the personal life and like getting ready for her. And I'm like, how do I breastfeed? Like, what do I do? Is more of a cluster, but so definitely feel more organized at work than personal life right now.
I love it. Oh my God. I'm giving you a hug through the phone, the screen. Yeah. Well, try to adopt your same ignorance is bliss that you did with Headbands for Hope. Like I was kind of a youngish, not super youngish mom, but I feel like, oh God, I don't know. Although
I know, I think that's like probably the best advice is to not have the expectations or like have, the set plan. Like it's just, I've heard every baby's different. Everything's different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Your life as you know it is going to be done. It's going to change. It's just, but it's like, I'm
okay with that. I'm ready for that. Like that's new chapter. Let's do it. Yeah.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to come to Raleigh and help organize her room.
Oh, please. I would love nothing more.
Okay. I would do it. That'll be my baby gift to you. So
please. I would love it. Thank you.
Well, Jess, thank you so much, not only for coming on our show and just sharing your wisdom and knowledge and insight with our audience, but for the work that you do just for the greater good, for women, for kids with cancer, just for being a true bright light for all of us. And again, we'll have links in our show notes. Jess is not paying me for this. Go buy both of her books. If you haven't read Chasing the Bright Side, go get it. And
you're hired. Yeah.
Seriously, I'll be your PR person. But really great stuff. And for any women entrepreneurs, I encourage you to check out all of her offerings. So until next week, guys, I'm Lori Palau. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.